In today's episode, we're going to be improving the Shop GUI by adding multiple categories and buttons that will allow us to display different categories. Our new category offers us a new way to actually display items in our shop, and one of the biggest lessons from this episode is how we can actually display models inside of GUIs. All of these pets here are actually models and not images. Now keep in mind that in this video, we don't have any plans on actually creating a full-fledged pet system. If you guys do want that though, leave a comment down below and we might make a spin-off episode of this where we do actually implement a pet system, owning the pets, having them follow you and do different things like that. But again, that is not what this episode entails. This is specifically focusing on the shop. Now, we're going to be continuing from where we left off in the last episode, but before we hop into Roblox Studio, we want to go ahead and grab two things. There's going to be a link in the description to a GitHub page which contains a bunch of code. Now, 99% of this code was not written by me. All credit goes to Ego Moose. I modified the code a tiny bit just to make it work a little bit better for how I generally use it. But what you're going to want to do is either highlight all of this code, or if you look towards the top right beside the button which says raw, there's going to be a copy to clipboard button, which you can click that and it'll directly copy all of the code to your clipboard. Then what you're going to want to do is go inside of Roblox Studio, inside of our Explorer, inside of the replicate storage, we're going to go ahead and expand the libs folder, and then we're going to go ahead and create a brand new module script inside of here. Then what we'll do is delete all the code that's inside of this module script, paste all of the code that we just copied from that GitHub page. We can then close out of that script, but then we want to go ahead and rename the module script. And what we're going to rename it to is Viewport Helper. Now, the name doesn't exactly matter, but you do want to make sure that you remember this name for later, because when we try to use the module script, of course, we need to know what it is actually named. In addition to that, we can also go ahead and download my free pet pack, which includes 10 different pet models from my website. It's completely free to download. All you have to do is go to the link in the description, click the download button, and you don't even have to create an account or anything to download this. And then once you've downloaded that, we can go back inside of Roblox Studio. And again, inside of the replicate storage, well, it actually doesn't technically matter because it's automatically going to be put inside of the workspace. But go ahead and right click inside of here and then click on Insert from File. Once you do that, find wherever you saved the pet models to. You do have to extract the zip file, and inside of the zip file will be an RBXM file, which you can then go ahead and open up to import into Roblox Studio. Oh, and actually, the pets folder was automatically imported directly inside of the replicate storage. I thought that usually those things go inside of the workspace, but that works perfectly for us. So now you should have a folder inside of the replicate storage called pets, and then if you take a look inside of there, you should see one script which says credit, because it does give credit to where these models are actually from, and then you should see a bunch of different models inside of here. Now, if you wanted to take a look at those models, what you could do is drag the folder inside of the workspace, hit F with the folder selected, and then you can kind of see them on screen right there. Anyway, we do want to keep them inside the replicate storage, so we'll go ahead and move them back. But now we're ready to begin working on the GUI. To begin working on the GUI, what we're going to do is go inside of the starter GUI, inside of the shop GUI, inside of the frame. And now the first thing that we're going to do is go ahead and add in a brand new button. So inside of the buttons frame, we're going to go ahead and duplicate the gems frame, and we're going to rename one of them to be called Pets. Then inside of the button, we have a title text label. Let's go ahead and update the text of this to say Pets as well. Now we're finished with creating the button. Next, what we're going to do is go ahead and actually duplicate the gems scrolling frame, and we're going to rename this to be called Pets as well. One key thing here is that I would recommend you name the buttons the exact same way that you're naming the scrolling frames, because when it comes to scripting, that's going to make scripting a lot easier, keeping those names the exact same. Then what we're going to do is set the visible property of the gems scrolling frame to false so that we don't see that, and now we know that we're only working with the Pets scrolling frame. Then inside of the Pets scrolling frame, let's first go ahead and start off by adjusting the UI grid layout. First, we're going to go ahead and adjust the size. So on the cell size for the X of the offset, we're going to set that to about 400. And then on the offset of the Y, we're going to set that to about 150. Then you can go ahead and duplicate the template a couple of times to kind of get a feel for how we want the padding to actually be set up. For the padding, I'm going to go with about 25 on both the X and the Y axes and see how that looks. And I think that's looking pretty good. We are going to change this up, so it's kind of hard for you to tell that this is actually looking good, but you can always come back to this once we fully finish creating the actual template itself. Anyways, let's go ahead and delete all of the other templates except for one. And now working on the template, what we're going to do is first we're going to start by moving over the icon frame. We want this to be positioned more towards the left. So for the position of this frame, we're going to reset all of this. So we're going to set the anchor points to 0 and also the position for all the scales to 0 as well. And then we're just going to go ahead and adjust the offset. So on the X offset, we're going to go with about 10. And actually for the Y, we want this to be centered vertically. So we're going to say 0.5 for the Y scale. And then going back to the anchor point, we're going to set the Y to 0.5 as well. And now that's centered vertically and it's appearing about 10 pixels from the left. So that's pretty nice. Now I'm going to leave the frame still being called icon, but generally when I think of icon, I think of an image, and more specifically an image label, which is what we have inside of here currently. But again, instead of using images, we're actually going to be using viewport frames to display models inside of here. So if you want to, you can rename the icon frame to something else, but I just kind of don't mind and would kind of prefer the consistency of keeping this section sort of called icon. So that's what I'm going to do, is keep this named icon, but instead of having an image label inside of here, we're actually going to go ahead and add in a viewport frame. Then let's go ahead and reposition and resize the viewport frame. We want to go ahead and center this in the middle of the icon frame. So let's go ahead and set the anchor points to 0.5 and the scales to 0.5 on both the axes. Then for the size of this, you can determine what you like. I'm just going to go with 0.9 on both the scales, so just like that. And then let's go ahead and set the background transparency of this to 1 so that we do not see the background. And that's actually all that we're going to do with the viewport frame and the icon frame. So we can go ahead and collapse that. It might look a little weird, or it might be kind of hard to tell what it's actually going to look like. But again, you can come back to this after you've scripted it and really got a better idea of what it actually looks like. Now let's go ahead and start working on all of the other components to this. So first off, I want to start by resizing the title text label. On the x-axis, we're going to go ahead and set the scale to 0. But for the offset, we're going to go with about 235. And we're going to go ahead and actually adjust the y offset to about 30. And we can also increase the text size to about 30 as well. Then I'm going to go ahead and just change the text to something like cat or dog, or I don't know, any basic pet name. And then let's go ahead and reposition this. So I'm going to set all of the anchor points to about 0. And then we're not going to use any scale for the position here, so we'll set those to 0 as well. But for the offset here, on the x-axis, we're going to go with about 150. And on the y, we're going to go with about 15. And you can feel free to take a look at that position and see what you think about it. I think that's looking pretty nice. Next, we have the amount text label, which I'm actually going to rename to be called description. And then we're actually going to adjust the text size of this a little bit because we want this text to be a little bit smaller as we're going to write some more words here compared to the title. So for the text size, I'm going to go with about 14, but of course you can readjust this in the future after you see what it actually looks like. Now for the actual size of this, we're going to do something pretty similar to what we did for the title text label. I mean, literally we could just copy the size property from the title text label and just paste it in here just like that. But we do want to make the Y offset a little bit larger because again, it's going to have a little bit more text inside of here compared to the title text label. So let's go with about 45, I would say. And then also you probably want to make sure that text wrapping is on so that if the text gets pretty long, it'll actually wrap down to a second line. And then let's go ahead and update the text of this to be a good amount of words so that we can see what the description actually looks like when there is a lot of words inside of it. And keep in mind, this is a really good way to kind of determine the maximum amount of text that you want to have set inside of here. Because when it comes to designing GUIs, what you kind of need to do is determine what text size you actually want to use based off how many words you're trying to fit inside of an element. So I'm just going to type out a very long string to get a general idea of how this actually looks. So I'm going to type out, this is a very long string, and then I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste it a couple of times. I copy and paste that about 3 times, and that's how it looks. And I think that looks pretty fine. But of course, if you would like to fit more text here, then you might want to decrease this a tiny bit, or you might want to avoid using so many words. Now, another thing that I want to do is go ahead and adjust the UI stroke because we are making the text a little bit smaller. We don't need to have such a thick stroke here. Instead of going with 5 for the thickness, we're going to go with about 3. Then let's go ahead and reposition the description text label. And for the position of this, we're not going to have any anchor points set. So let's set those both to 0. We don't want to use any scale here either. So we'll set those to 0. Now for the X offset, we're going to go with about 160. And for the Y offset, we're going to go with about 50. Actually, I kind of just noticed this clearly isn't centered with the title text label. So instead of going with 160, let's actually go with 150, just like that. Now I think that's looking pretty great. The next thing we want to do is go ahead and adjust the buy button. So with the buy button, we definitely want to go ahead and resize this a little bit. On the X offset, we're going to go with about 100, and on the Y offset, we're going to go with about 30. Then let's go ahead and reposition this. For both the anchor points, we're going to go with 0, and for the scale of both axes, we're going to go with 0 as well. Then for the position, on the offset, we're going to go with about 215. On the x-axis, and then on the y, we're going to go with about 105. And now I think that's sized pretty well and positioned pretty well, but of course we want to go ahead and readjust the size of the text inside of here. So we'll go ahead and adjust the text size of the price text label. And instead of being 24, we're just going to go ahead and adjust it a tiny bit to be about 22. Of course, we'll go ahead and adjust the UI stroke as well because we don't want it to be as thick. I'm thinking about going with either 2 or 3. Really depends on how you're feeling. I think like maybe 2.5 is pretty good, but of course, feel free to determine that for yourself. But now that we've made all of those changes, I think this is looking perfectly fine. So we can collapse pretty much everything inside of the template. And if you want to, go ahead and duplicate the template a couple of times and see how these all actually are laid out and looking. And I think they're looking pretty good. Another thing you might want to do to make this even nicer is adjust the UI padding a tiny bit. It depends on if you want to adjust the padding top, but I kind of want to make them a little consistent. So I think we're going to go with 20 on the top and then also 20 on the bottom as well. So let's scroll all the way down. And now I think that's looking pretty nice. If you're happy with how that looks, then go ahead and select all of the templates except for one and delete all of the extras. Then we can go ahead and collapse this, collapse this frame, collapse the entire GUI, collapse the entire starter GUI, and now we're ready to begin scripting this. Now, to begin scripting this, the first thing that we're going to do is go ahead and update the shop config. So inside of the replicated storage, we have the configs folder, and inside of there, we have the shop module script. Let's go ahead and open that up. And the first thing we're going to do is go ahead and update the config table. So already inside of the config table, we have our gems added to this. Now let's go ahead and add in another category, which we're going to go ahead and call pets. And it's going to be set up pretty similar to how the gems table is actually set up. So for the keys, those are going to be the individual pet names here. And then of course, we're going to add some properties to each of those pets as well. Now, I understand you may have your own pet pack that you might want to be using, but for the sake of making it through this tutorial, not getting stuck, not running into issues, and then burning out or not finding the solution and then quitting this, I would highly recommend that you use my pet pack, follow through the entire video, get it working, and then try to adapt the system that we create here to work with your system. I think that's the much easier route to go rather than trying to follow through this tutorial using your own pet system or somebody else's pet system and then failing to get through the tutorial and then trying to fix your way from there. That's a lot harder to do. Anyways, the main reason I'm saying that is because the pet names that we specify here have to match up with the pets that are actually inside of our pet pack. So of course, make sure you look inside of the pets folder so that you can see all of the available pet names that we can even use. So first, I'm going to go ahead and add in the bunny pet, which we're going to set equal to a table. And now inside of this table, we're going to go ahead and add in a property called price, similar to how we do for our gem items. And we'll just say for the price of this, it's going to be 1,000. Then we'll go ahead and add in another property to this, which we haven't used before. And that's actually going to be the description, which is going to be a string. And of course, the text that we include here is what's going to be written in the description text label for that pet. Now, I honestly just use like AI to kind of generate random strings. So it literally doesn't matter what you write here. Feel free to write whatever you want to. Me and the AI just came up with super cute bunny that makes you jump higher. Don't tell the players, but it doesn't actually make them jump higher. Anyways, we'll go ahead and add in our second pet, which is the cat pet. Again, it's going to be equal to a table. It's going to have a price, which is going to be about 2,000. Then it'll have a description, which is going to be equal to a string. Then let's go ahead and write in a string here. Again, the cat does not actually make them cooler, but they'll never know. Now we're going to add one final pet, which is going to be a dog. It's going to have a price of 3,000. It'll also have a description. And this description might actually be true because the people who play my Roblox games, they are the drooling type of people. I'm kidding, of course. But anyway, I'm only going to add in about 3 different pets to here. You can literally add in as many as you want. I just don't really see a point in continuing to add more to this. It's, it gets the point across. But anyways, now that we finish updating the config, the next thing we're going to do is actually go ahead and update our 2 functions that are inside of here. So to the getConfig function, we want to go ahead and create a brand new variable. And we're pretty much doing it the exact same way that we did for gems. But what we're going to do is create a variable called petConfig, which is going to be equal to config.pets. And then we're going to try to index that table with the package. So if we actually do get a config for that package, then what we're going to do is go ahead and return the pet config. Again, it's literally the exact same thing that we do for the gem config. We just do it a little bit differently. And now when we go to the get item type function, we're going to pretty much do the exact same thing again. So we're going to go ahead and say local pet config equals. Then we'll go ahead and try to see if that pet actually exists. So we'll say pets and then index that with the package. And if the pet does actually exist inside of there, then we're going to go ahead and return the word pets. Remember how I said that you want to keep the button name pets the same name as our pets scrolling frame? This is kind of important too, because you want to kind of keep the category all consistent. And as long as we keep the naming schemes all consistent, that's going to make scripting so much easier. Anyways, with all that being said, we're fully finished with updating the shop config, so we can go ahead and close out of that. Now we should also be fully finished inside the replicated storage, so we can collapse that as well. Next, what we're going to do is begin scripting on the client side some new features for the GUI. So inside of Star Player, inside the Star Player scripts, inside the controllers folder, inside the GUIs folder, let's go ahead and open up the shop module script. Now, towards the top of the module script, right below where we create the variable for the format number library, we're going to go ahead and create another variable for another library, which is actually going to be the Viewport model library. So I'm going to name the variable Viewport model. We're going to set that equal to require replicate storage.libs.viewport helper. And actually, I kind of changed the naming scheme up here a little bit. I didn't even realize. You can name this whatever you want. I would just recommend trying to be consistent with your naming scheme, which I kind of failed at here. You can name this Viewport helper. You can name the variable the same way. It really doesn't matter. I'm going to leave the variable named Viewport model, but make sure it points to the viewport helper in the replicate storage. Again, you can rename the module to viewport model to stay consistent like that, but I don't want to add any more confusion, so we're just going to keep it this way. And I'd recommend that you probably want to use the same variable name as me, otherwise you might get yourself confused as you're following through the video. But if you want to name this something different and you feel confident with it, then go ahead, feel free to do that. Anyways, below the GUI variable, we have the frame variable, and now we're going to want to go ahead and add in a new variable, which is going to be called buttons, and that's going to be equal to frame.buttons. Then we have our gems variable, which below this variable, we want to create a variable called pets, which is going to point to the pet scrolling frame. So we're going to say frame.pets. Remember, this is why I said that the naming scheme is pretty important here, and you'll see why in just a couple of seconds. So next, what we're going to do is go below the update enabled function, and we're going to go ahead and create a brand new function, which again is going to be part of the local table, and it's going to be called setup buttons. And what we're referring to by buttons is the sort of category buttons that the players can click on between gems or pets to toggle those frames to be visible or hidden. Now, there's many ways to go about doing this, but I'm going to show you one easy way that I like to do this. And again, right here is where it actually becomes very important to keep your naming scheme very consistent. So what we're going to do is we're going to iterate through all of the children that's inside of the buttons frame. So we're going to say for underscore button, and we can also specify the type of this to be a text button, just to make it easier while we're scripting. This isn't actually true because there are other children inside of the buttons frame, but doing it this way, when we actually script by using the button variable, that's when this will be easier. And it's kind of true, but you'll see why in a second. Anyway, what we're going to actually iterate through is the buttons frame, and then we're going to go ahead and use get children on it. And then we'll go ahead and say do. So since we're casting the button variable to a text button, we do want to make sure that what we're actually working with is text buttons. So we're going to create a variable called is text button, which is going to be equal to button, and then we'll use a colon, and we'll say is a, and then we'll make sure that it is a text button. Now, if it is not a text button, then what we want to do is we don't want to say return end, we want to say continue end. Because in a for loop, if we say return end, then as soon as we find something that's not a button, that will break this entire loop, and it will not iterate through all of the children that are inside of there. So there's definitely a chance that it won't cover all of the text buttons, or maybe even any text buttons. It just depends on the order of children that get iterated through. Anyways, now that we know that we are working with text buttons, what we're going to do is go ahead and say button.mouse button one click, connect, create an anonymous function inside of here. And then anytime the button is clicked, we want to go ahead and make that specific scrolling frame visible. But instead of writing that inside of this function, we're going to go ahead and create another function for handling that. So beneath this function, we're going to go ahead and create another function, which is going to be part of the local table, and it's going to be called display frame. Now it's going to have a single parameter, which is going to be called frame, and it's going to be a string. You're perfectly fine with specifying this to be a string, but to make it a little bit clearer for yourself, this is technically only ever going to be gems or pets, as long as you followed this correctly. Again, specifying the type here doesn't actually matter because you're never going to manually use this function and pass through those strings to this function. We're simply going to use this function only inside of the setup buttons function, specifically when we click that button. And I'll show you what I mean. Before we even create the display function, let's go ahead and use it. So inside of the setup buttons function, when we set the button up and when it's actually clicked, we're going to go ahead and call that function. So we'll say local display frame, and then we're going to go ahead and pass through the name of the button. So now let's go back down to the display frame function. And this time what we're going to do is we're going to iterate through all of the children inside of the primary frame. We're going to check if it is a scrolling frame, and then we're going to update its visibility based on the name of the frame which we're trying to display. It might sound confusing, but it's actually incredibly simple, and you'll see why. So let's go ahead and iterate through all of those frames. Now we're going to say for underscore child, and then we're going to specify the child to be a scrolling frame. Again, this isn't necessary, and even in this context, it's not even going to make the scripting easier. It's just kind of something that I like to do, but it also kind of might help you better understand it as well a little bit, and you'll see why. So what we're actually going to iterate through is the primary frame, and then we're going to use get children on this. So now as we iterate through all the children inside of the main frame, what we want to do is make sure that we actually have a scrolling frame. So let's create a variable called is scrolling frame, and to determine if it's a scrolling frame, we're going to say child is a, and we're going to make sure that it is a scrolling frame. Now, again, similar to how we did in the function above, if not is scrolling frame, then continue end, do not return. And now that we know that we are working with a scrolling frame, what we're going to do is say child.visible, and we're going to set the visibility based on if the name of the child is equal to the frame. So we're going to say child.name equals frame. Now, this might seem confusing, but essentially think about it this way. If we click the pets button, then this function is going to be called with the word pets. And essentially what we're doing is we're making every single scrolling frame which does not equal that frame not visible. And then the only frame which has the same name as the frame that was passed to here will become visible. And if that frame is already visible, that's still okay because it'll just still remain visible. That's exactly how this function works. And now, with that being said, we're actually fully finished with creating these two functions and actually setting up the buttons. So it doesn't really matter where you place this, but we're just going to do this above when we call the generate gem buttons function. We're going to go ahead and say local.setUpButtons, just like that. And now we're actually setting up the category buttons, which actually maybe we do want to rename this function to be called setUpCategoryButtons, especially considering we're calling our other functions generate gem buttons and things like that. This might make it a little bit less confusing. So I just renamed the function to be called setUpCategoryButtons. You might want to do that too, but it doesn't exactly matter. Anyways, the next thing we're going to do is pretty much the same thing that we did for the generate gem buttons function. And essentially, we're going to do this exact same thing, but tailored toward the specifics of the pet buttons. So let's go ahead and create a function below the generate gem buttons, which we're going to go ahead and call generate pet buttons. And it's not going to have any parameters. Now inside of here, we're going to iterate through all the pets inside of the shop config. So we're going to say for name, comma, config in shop config .config.pets do. Then we're going to go ahead and create a variable called button, which is going to be equal to pets.template. And then we're going to go ahead and clone that button. And like I said, a lot of the stuff that we do inside of this function, we're literally going to do down here as well. So we're going to go ahead and parent this to its specific scrolling frame. So we'll go ahead and parent that to the pet scrolling frame. Then we're going to go ahead and rename the button. So we'll set the name of the button to actually be the name of the pet. Then we're going to go ahead and update the layout order of this. So we'll say .layout order equals, and we'll literally do it the exact same way. So we'll say config.price, multiply that by 0.01 to make the numbers kind of smaller. And now here's where some of the difference begins to happen. Now we want to go ahead and actually display the model inside of the viewport frame. And this is incredibly easy. To do this, we're going to go ahead and create a variable called viewport frame, which we can specify if we want to as being a viewport frame. And we're going to set that equal to button.icon.viewport frame. Then we want to go ahead and create a variable called model, which is going to be equal to the model of the pet. And remember, we store our pets inside of the replicated storage. So we're going to say replicated storage.pets, and then we're going to index that with the name of the pet. And now that we have the model, let's go ahead and clone it. And now we're going to go ahead and use our viewport model library. So we're going to say viewport model.generate viewport. And for the first argument, we need to pass through a viewport frame. So we're going to say viewport frame. Then we're going to go ahead and pass through the model. And then finally, we want to go ahead and pass through a C-frame to adjust the orientation of the model. So we're going to say C-frame.angles. We're going to pass through 0. Then we're going to say math.rad. We'll pass through -90 inside of there. And then we're going to pass through 0 for the RZ. Now, I'm going to be completely honest. Like I say, every time we work with C-frames, I'm not great with C-frames, and I'm not knowledgeable enough on the subject to be able to explain exactly why we're doing this to you in the best way possible. So literally, just go ahead and copy this code and paste it in the ChatGPT, and that will give you a better explanation than what I could come up with if I'm being completely honest. Just understand that you are going to want to adjust this specific part right here if the pets are facing the wrong direction. Maybe they're looking up, maybe they're looking down, maybe they're looking to the left, or maybe they're looking to the right. This is the thing right here that you would modify and play around with these numbers. Okay, and now that we've done that, we're pretty much going to do every single thing that we did up here, but making maybe like 1 or 2 adjustments. Honestly, we just go ahead and copy these lines right here and then paste them down into here. So we do want to go ahead and update the text of the title text label inside of the button to display the actual name of the pet. Now, our pets don't actually have any amount text labels. Instead, they have a description text label, which we're going to go ahead and update the text of. And what we would set that to is actually the description property of its config. But then we will go ahead and update the price of the buy button as well, just like we do right there. And then, of course, this does not have an icon inside of it, so we can go ahead and delete that. Now, also, because this is a text button, when the button is clicked on, similar to what we do up here, where we fire to the server to communicate, hey, we're trying to buy an item, you can do the exact same thing. And then you could also just fire, you could literally do the exact same thing. And I mean, like, literally, just go ahead and copy and paste that. So when we click on this, we can go ahead and fire off this remote event to the server to say the name of the pet. And then on the server side, we can interpret that and then do whatever we specifically need to reward the player with the pet. But like I said in the beginning of this, we're not actually going to be implementing a pet system into the game here. So that's why we're not going to be making any changes on the server side to actually implement buying the pet. But if that is something that you guys would like to see, go ahead and leave a comment down below, because that's going to be like a multi-part video or multi-part series and not something that we could just fit all inside of this single video. Anyway, similar to how we finish off the generate gem buttons function, we go ahead and hide the template inside of the gems frame. We're going to do the same thing here. So after we iterate through all the buttons, we set all those buttons up. The last thing we want to do is go inside of the pets frame. Then we want to go ahead and select the template button. And then we're going to go ahead and set the visible property to false so that we no longer see it. And cool, with all that being said, we're fully finished with creating this function. So let's go all the way back towards the top of our script, more specifically inside of the onStart function. And similar to how we call the generate gems button function, let's go ahead and call the generate pets button function, just like that. So with all that being said, we're fully finished with scripting this entire thing on the client side. So we can go ahead and close out of the shop module script, collapse the starter player, start up our game, and test this out. And now, once we get into our game, the frame is already being displayed to us because we made the pets frame visible by default and hid the gems one. But let's go ahead and click on the gems button. And when we click the gems button, we can see our other items are being displayed to us. Then when we click the pets button, we can see all of the pets are being displayed to us. So we can keep swapping back between the two. And if we click the category that's already being displayed, it's not like the category is hidden or anything. So we can see that this is all working correctly. We can also see that the models are being displayed pretty nicely inside of the viewport frame. And we can see that the description's appearing pretty nicely as well as the price and the pet names and all those different things like that. So I'm pretty happy with the results of this, and let me know what you guys are in the comment section down below. Now, I already kind of assumed that some people might be a little bit upset that we didn't implement anything on the server side, but don't worry. In the next episode, we're actually going to be making a tools category where the player can purchase a tool, own the tool, and then equip the tool as well. It's definitely going to be a little bit more complicated than these ones, but I've been trying to start off relatively small and work our way up to building up more complicated versions of this. I understand if you didn't care for the last shop or even this shop, but also keep in mind that if you are learning scripting, it really is helpful to do the same thing multiple times over and over again, because each time you get a better understanding of it and it becomes even easier. So again, even if you didn't really love these shops or you wanted more from them, keep in mind that doing this work is giving you a better understanding and will make learning in the future even easier, as well as helps you retain the logic that you're already learning in the past. But anyways, ladies and gentlemen, that's going to be it for this episode. As always, if you did enjoy, make sure you smash the like button. Please leave a comment down below letting other people know that it did work. I and they really do appreciate it. It helps everyone out. And as usual, if you want to gain access to all the scripts and the game file that we made during this episode, as well as a ton of other assets, you can visit MonzterDev or my Patreon, link down below in the description to both of these. You can gain access to a ton of assets to easily create your next Roblox game, as well as support me in creating all the content that I create. Anyways, with all that being said, I hope that you guys have a great day, and I'll see you guys in the next episode.